one of the classes, they began talking about the tones that you carry in your writings. And I recognized that there's tones to communication. And from that, it just started helping me get a framework for how to not feel out of control or all over the place in communicating.
There's nothing like feeling like you've effectively communicated.
Yeah.
You don't have to have formal platforms of communication to need to become a better communicator. Communication affects any interpersonal arena of life. Yeah. Communication has an impact on it. And as someone who communicates for a living, there's nothing like feeling like you've effectively communicated something.
And there's nothing like feeling like you've not effectively.
On the other side,
the most frustrating thing for me is like, I want to articulate something in me, but man, words just don't come. And so, I mean, I could sit in there and just be terrible at it.
Sure.
But like, why not try?
So let's go through what those tones are, and then we'll kind of like unpack how we see them played out. So what are the 4 tones?
So the first one is the tower tone or voice. The second one is the teacher tone or voice. Third one is the field tone or voice. And then the last one is the pit tone or voice.
So tower, teacher, field, and pit. Hey everyone, welcome back once again to the Jacob Sheriff Podcast. Today we are talking about communication. We're communicating about communicating. Yeah, that's what we're doing. So this is a topic that affects everybody every day at some degree or another, and becoming skillful in our communication. Don't be skillful, whatever that is. Becoming skillful in our communication is just a valuable thing to pay attention to, because the more effective we are at communicating, the better we are in relationships, the better we are at work, the better, like, it's one of those areas of life that like affects a ton of things. And so all of us each have our own kind of unique styles of communication, and even just different levels of experience at different methods of communication, things like that. Obviously, Pastor Jacob, professional pastor and speaker, teacher, like you have to communicate from the pulpit a lot to large groups of people. Yeah. Hannah and I are much less experienced in that particular arena. My preferred style of doing stuff like that is exactly this, like asking questions and hosting conversations. It's just very comfort zone for me. But Hannah, also you've been doing some learning recently, and I'm gonna just kind of hand it over to you with maybe some background on some things that you've been learning, and we'll just see where this conversation goes.
That sounds good. So, as kind of stated, and I'll go ahead and state, never really had going back to previous episodes of that image of communicating. I've had to work on that image for myself. But trying to think how far to go back. I think that one thing around this topic that I always think about is, if I'm to take it just into my home with my kids, they're not going to always remember what I say, but how they felt in the midst of what I was saying. And so recently, I've just been on a journey of wanting to grow and develop in many things, but have felt led in this journey of always had a desire to want to write, but never, that wasn't like English was not my best subject. Like I didn't just have creativity when it came to writing, but just kind of like, you know what, I want to learn more about this. And so currently I'm enrolled in some things that are just teaching me some really neat things, and I'm excited to apply those. But recently in one of the classes, they began talking about the tones that you carry in your writing. And Jacob and I got in a really neat conversation about this, and I recognized that there's tones to communication. And from that, it just started helping me get a framework for how to not feel out of control or all over the place in communicating, but there's actually certain rhythms or ways in which we communicate, and different ones are for different times and purposes and stuff. So I don't know if we want to jump into
Well,
what I learned, but
there's nothing like feeling like you've effectively communicated.
yeah,
You don't have to have formal
There you go.
platforms of communication to need to become a better
That's good.
communicator.
Mhm.
As you said in the intro, communication affects any intrapersonal arena of life.
Yeah.
Communication has an impact on it. So whether it be formal communications from platforms or leaderships, or you're leading people, communicating, or if it's just friendships and relationships, marriage, parenting, communication is indispensable. And being a more effective communicator, all of us can become or need to become a more effective communicator. And as someone who communicates for a living,
Yeah.
Communications pro.
Yeah. Well, and
not
being
that I'm good at it,
somebody
but like
that-
there's nothing
yeah.
like feeling like you've effectively communicated
Right.
And
something.
there's nothing like feeling like you've not effectively.
On the other
Like,
side,
the
yeah.
most frustrating thing for me is like I want to articulate something in me, but man, words just don't come. And so, I mean, I could sit in there and just be terrible at it. And a lot of that's my own narrative in my own head.
Sure.
But like, why not try to?
Have you found that? I mean, you're interested in learning how to write, obviously, because you're going through this training. But
Yeah.
have you found that sometimes it's just more comfortable to say certain things by writing it out versus speaking it?
Yeah, I think that the discipline and exercise of writing it out, maybe first before saying it all, has been really good for me because when I would write things out, it didn't make any sense, and so it's good awareness that like, to think you're communicating what you think, you're probably not. So I just was met always with just, man, I'm just terrible at this over and over and over again. And I'm really hard on myself too. So it's probably not as bad as I'm making it sound. And as we get into tones, I could probably identify a tone, in what I'm saying. But yeah, it's like I've got to put myself in a place to learn and grow what that looks like. So
that's cool. So these four voices or four tones, these are things that, in the training you're going through is like from a writer's perspective, like an author's perspective. But I think it's really interesting the overlap that you've seen just in personal communication. So let's go through what those tones are, and then we'll kind of like unpack how we see them played out. So what are the four tones?
So the first one is the tower tone or voice. The second one is the teacher tone or voice. Third one is the field tone or voice. And then the last one is the pit tone or voice.
So tower, teacher, field, and pit. Ooh, that's a nice teaser. So you guys, if you want to you got to stick around if you want to find out what all four of these are.
Yeah.
Be sure to like and subscribe for the YouTube algorithm. Yeah. Anyway, so let's start with tower tone. What is tower
that?
tone? What is it?
So if you just think about what a tower is, it's some kind of structure that's higher up. And so this is the tone of like elevated a place. Like, so you're talking from that place of either knowing more or seeing more than probably the people that you're talking to.
Right.
Would be a way to
So
see
sort of
that.
an authoritative kind of top-down
Mhm.
perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and like with writing and things like that, this would be maybe an instruction manual or just very like the facts. There's just facts about what you're communicating. But in interpersonal, this could be kind of that challenger or that authoritative voice. So
that could be positional authority, like parent to child, or leader to follower would be that place of positional authority. And some of it, when you maybe think in the realm of gifts, we're probably talking about things like a prophetic gifting, that it's an elevated perspective. And so the words that are coming out are from that elevated perspective. Or maybe one other example I'm kind of thinking of is maybe someone that's experienced and they're coming from a place of
like an
experiential knowledge.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Keep going.
No, I was just going to say like that expert perspective. Like, so I mean, there's so many things I can think of, but right now,
and maybe one of the qualifiers of this is these tones. There aren't good tones and bad tones about these specific things. Now, there are good tones and bad tones we have when it comes to how we communicate things, but this specific mode is about the position of authority you're in to communicate something effectively. And so each of these have a good expression and are needed in sometimes. And all of these also can have a dark side where you're using a tone or a voice that's ineffective. So the tower tone, there's a place for that authority, for that knowledge, for that communication, for that voice to be manifested out of authority. And then there's a time where that's not effective. It's not going to work.
Yeah, I think of like, because my world is home and kids and stuff, like if my kid's running out in front of a car, like they're going to hear that tower tone.
Right.
Like there's trouble coming. There's no like making sure they feel right in the moment. Like there is I know something you don't know here, it's coming out. So I mean, that's one example. It may be silly, but, and then, I mean, I'm trying to think of how to paint it in a better picture, but so those are just some of the ways I can see that.
So what comes to mind for me is like, if you as a leader are trying to inspire a group of people and cast vision,
there you go.
right?
That's
it's like
a visionary.
Even the perspective of the person on the tower is like they can see further. And so there's a tone that comes with this perspective that helps people get a picture even in their imaginations of what is possible in the future. And so it can be an inspiring tone, if it's communicating the right things.
Yeah. And one thing that was said about this tone is that to show struggle in this tone is actually a distraction. That this is to be a tone of great confidence. So this isn't the time where you're like kind of bringing people along in your own struggle. No, this is kind of straight and to the point.
Right.
So that'd be a way to say it is there's a lot of confidence in that tone because a lack of confidence would communicate distraction or get their eye off of what you're actually trying to say.
Gotcha.
So.
And where this would be ineffective is if it tips the scales towards arrogance.
There you go.
Or you're elevating yourself with that authority, or you're trying to communicate with authority that you don't have.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a relational authority you don't have. You don't have the relationship with a group of people to speak authoritatively to them. Or you're coming from a place of insecurity. So you're trying to elevate yourself to get that authority, but it's actually an insecurity, and that would make that tone ineffective or, I don't know, it's annoying.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be effective in this tone, you have to have authority in something. That's where the expert part comes in. It's like you have to know what you're talking about. Otherwise, it's not going to be an effective tone to whoever you're talking to. So, I don't know. It's kind of a neat frame.
In a interpersonal like exercise, think of like husband and wife, right? If the wife is wanting to communicate or ask a question or like engage in a conversation with her husband, but is wanting a relational connection, but all she's getting back is this tower tone, like sort of like high elevated perspective, like that's not meeting the communication need in the moment. Like maybe the words are correct. Maybe the attitude isn't even in the wrong spot, but the tone actually communicates a lot. Just even in like a relational value and connection with the other person. And so like interpersonally, you probably wouldn't see this tone used very well unless there is sort of an authoritative gap in the relationship where it's like, you need to communicate vision and direction and mission. You use this tone. You don't use this to,
you're not going to get feedback with this kind of tone.
Right.
Like there is that picture of elevated perspective where it's not like it's a two-way communication. It's for the person communicating to be the only one heard.
Yeah.
So
gotcha. Yeah. Cool. Well, what's the next tone?
The next one is the teacher tone. This one is kind of, we've all, well, maybe not all of us, but the idea of the teacher standing in front of the classroom and, like that particular tone is different from the tower tone in that they're in the front, but they're not necessarily elevated, higher. But the teacher tone is that tone of like someone guiding you, so they have some experience. So I guess one way to communicate it would be this is what I've done, so coming along with me. So they have a level of experiential knowledge or wisdom through it all that they're taking on that posture of the guide. And I think a lot about like the Gospels and Jesus, when it comes to the way he was with his disciples, and just that posture of come along. I want to be careful not to go into the next one, but you can share in the past struggles, and you may be going through present struggles, but you're letting the past struggles kind of help in guiding somebody that maybe is in the midst of that struggle.
Gotcha. So maybe I hear a way to differentiate tower and teacher, what I'm hearing. So I'm not saying I'm right about this, so check me on this. I hear more, the tower tone is directional. So it's for the communication is for the purpose of clarity of direction or clarity we'll keep using the word direction. Whereas the teacher is more instructional. Instead of being directional, it's instructional. So the communication, the tone is for the purpose of the learning, not necessarily the action that we have to go toward or the direction. It's more, that tone is more about ensuring that the student is learning, not the follower is following.
That's good. I think that's perfect.
It's like the goal of that teacher may be, and a successful sense of communication would be that who you're talking to understands.
Yeah.
It's like they got it. They understood the thing that you were trying to instruct them in. You're trying to share knowledge and learning, not just some elevated goal or mission. It's like you want the person that you're talking to gain independent understanding of what it is that you're saying, not just trust me, this is where we're going.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. I think that this would be the person that is further along the journey with you, that's able to encourage you, along the way. There's a sense where this tone has already arrived to something, not from that arrogance, but like, I've been through this, I've done that. And it is for the purpose of like mentoring the person, that you're talking to. So maybe this in parenting would be, I don't know, like something as simple as teaching your kid how to do something. You're not just directionally hoping they catch it, but you've got to make sure they catch what you're actually communicating, and they effectively do that.
So make this simple example came to mind. Like you're trying to teach your kid how to tie their shoes.
Yeah.
Like with tower tone, it's like, imagine what it will be like when your shoes are tied and you can run fast.
Yeah.
And you're not giving them any idea on how to do it. You're just saying, we got to get our shoes on. We got to go.
Yeah. Teacher, there's steps involved.
A teacher's like, okay, this is how you start, and then this is what you do, and then this is how you complete that process.
So in parenting, the tower tone is much more like the desire is obedience / compliance. Right. Obedience is preferable. Compliance is acceptable.
Yeah.
But it's for obedience. So, go to bed. I don't have to inspire you. I just need you to obey.
Right.
So usually the tower tone would be more appropriate in the younger ages, whereas our kids get older, you can't just stand on the mountain of positional authority.
Right.
You have to have enough relationship to begin to teach them, here's why we're telling you to do this. Here's how you can learn this, that you're not just getting obedience or compliance, you're getting learning and growth from our children.
What would you say this looks like just in leadership in general? That's where I started, like, this is super cool, when it comes to these types of, and we can keep going through the tones, but I don't know, just in leading leaders, because I know I'm going to stay in the realm of home and, kids and all those things.
The way I imagine it, the way I kind of maybe have been processing it since we've had this conversation is, the tower tone, it's about ensuring that followers are moving in the right direction. As a leader, the hope, the desire, my desire, I don't know about in general, but my desire is that I can see out ahead, that I can see a future, a direction. And the tower tone would be, we're going in this direction and I want you to come with me, but I have to communicate this with authority to say, this is what we're doing. This is where we're going. And then hopefully enough authority to also say, and we're going to be okay. That can be change. We'll have a conversation about change at a later time.
Yeah.
But that's what's necessary in change for me is being able to see a future that the challenge or the pain or the struggle between here and that future is worth it because of the future. So the tower tone tends, I hear in the tower tone, it's a little bit more about ensuring followers are moving in the right direction. Whereas the teacher tone is not just about followers, but it's helping them understand the why and being able to become not just more effective followers, but leaders themselves.
Yeah.
That their learning, their understanding will ensure that leadership, whatever it be, direction or just an understanding of what it means to be a leader, gets duplicated or multiplied in more people. Tower will ensure you have followers. And if you just have a strong personality and confidence, you can probably get followers. But tower tone can't make other leaders.
Yeah.
It does. In my experience from this framework,
yeah,
tower tone doesn't ensure other leaders. Whereas teacher, in the very least, has the possibility that leaders can emerge because the goal is on the person's growth, not us collectively getting to a destination. That's the way I'm understanding it at this moment.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah. So what's the next tone?
Number three is the filled voice. The way this one is described is they walk down to be with the people. So there's this imagery of like you're journeying together in the midst of whatever that journey is. The tone or maybe the way to say it is, I kind of just said it, but we're in this together. So there's a togetherness in it. It's not that elevated, I'm up here, you're down here, or even that I've arrived in some way and I'm going to bring you along. This one is like, we're walking together in the midst of it.
There's like a peer-to-peer kind of connection and relationship. Yeah.
And there's a tone of, this is probably a lot of like that vulnerability tone, like things aren't perfect, but there's still kind of a hopeful outlook to it. This is kind of like if you're giving maybe like a live tutorial or something, there's things about that you're showing people in and out of what's going on. But this is definitely not I've arrived. There's wisdom in it, but not necessarily from that place of I've gotten past the struggle. This is kind of like in the midst of the struggle, what I'm learning.
Right. So like showing, when you're showing something, example form or coaching. Is what I kind of hear in that. The field has very much like a coaching vibe. Like I still have authority. Yeah. I still have wisdom. But my authority is not to assert from above. It's the authority is to work with you while we're in it together.
Yeah. And I would say like, I'm not even sure that this one is carrying that, like I'm even further along than you. It's really more like we're going through it right now. Right. And I think that this one, I'm trying to think of an example of what this would look like.
This seems like Jesus in the Gospels.
Yeah. So I had my tones wrong, but yeah, that's what.
Well, I mean, he is still teacher.
Yeah.
But while he was on earth making disciples, he was with them.
Yeah. What were you going to say?
I was going to say maybe, most husband and wife relationship conversations would maybe be in this tone or, is at least like we're in this together.
There's a partnership.
There's a like we're working together towards a towards a common goal, and you're vulnerable to one another with your struggles and things that aren't quite resolved yet. There's probably an assumed level of trust. It's like if
this one's a little more messy.
Yeah. There's probably less guardedness. You're not necessarily guarding your language as much. You're just kind of like, hey, this is just the messy reality where it is, and I'm just going to communicate it as I see it right now. I don't even know that I have gained any sort of insight or wisdom, but I'm just going to tell you where I am right now, and maybe you can relate to me in that process. So like we're in the field. It's like a field reporter kind of like out. I guess that's kind of the idea.
And it's a really relatable, like right now reality, what's going on,
right.
So this is one that is a real, like there can be a rawness to it that actually people can really relate to, So I think of maybe often what is the post on social media carry a lot of these kinds of tones, you know? So that's a way of communicating your life, what you're going through, like all of those things are carrying those tones. So that would be an example in writing. But yeah, I think that relationship like you described is really accurate. Or if you're, you know, in a business place and you've got teammates and you're working on a common goal, like those kinds of ways are the way those tones are getting carried, you know, in different things. This is one of my favorite tones.
You think this is maybe your default tone?
I think so. Yeah, I think. And so why this was kind of like really, what's the word? Like why this like really set with me is I recognize that in places of, like I mentioned, communication not being just like the thing that I just wake up for, but recognizing positions or places of like, this isn't always the right tone to be in, and recognizing that the teacher tone or tower tone were not as much my comfort zone, but I very much am comfortable in the field, like, you know, because there's just like, there's the sense where I don't have to, the pressure of arrival or the pressure of that authoritative, you know, whatever.
You're not claiming to be an expert.
No.
And like on the flip side of that, if you're used to carrying authority, strong authority, and you're conditioned in tower and teacher tone, the field tone sounds unacceptable to you.
Yeah, it sounds like
I'm not
weakness.
allowed to admit vulnerability. I can't. That will challenge. And I would say that like kind of our parents' generation and older tend to take on the tower and teacher tone. And so vulnerability that's now more common and acceptable and relatable is almost like you shouldn't do that. And I've seen many people struggle with that. But people that are used to the field tone don't know how to have authority. Sometimes the way they would exert authority, it almost doesn't build confidence in people. And so that's where you have your natural, but then you also have to grow in some of these others when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate.
And I think that just even in the sharing of this information, that's what they were even mentioning is like primarily our generation hears better from the field voice.
Right.
They're not hearing the teacher voice and the tower voice like a generation had in previous generations. And so they very much enjoy the minutia and mess of doing it together.
I think there's something very interesting to unpack there. But let's get to the last tone and then maybe come back to that thought. That way we don't because I feel like that could be a rabbit trail we could.
So the last one is the pit voice. This one is described as like a dangerous voice, a hopeless narrative, and life is never getting better. So this is just your person with no way out of the pit. I mean, it's just, this one's harder for me because I'm people of faith. It's like there's always somewhere out, you know. But I mean, I guess this is a real tone that can be taken.
I mean, I don't typically do sound effects in our recording,
you got one?
But this one is just too appropriate. I mean, it's that tone, right?
There you go.
Sorry. Maybe that was a little cringy. Sorry. But, this sounds like just a really down kind of like, hey.
You're in a dark place.
Depths
and
of despair. Like, this is Psalm 51. Like, this is like, you know.
Psalm 130. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord.
There you go.
I hear in that it's similar to the field in that I'm in the middle of this, whereas the field is like, but here's where I'm at and where I'm growing,
there's
where I'm
movement
learning.
in the
There's
field.
movement in the pit. It's like I'm just done. I don't know. This is just where I'm at, and that's it. I don't know what's next. I don't know. There seems to be less direction, less clarity, and it's only confusion. It's only darkness.
That's good. Yeah. This one's hard for me because I'm like, there's always hope. And so I don't have a lot of words around this one.
But this also gets you a lot of attention on social media.
Yeah.
When you vomit pit-like voice on social media, you'll get empathy. You'll get, you won't get real empathy or compassion. You'll get text that says, you know, praying hands or I'm feeling sorry for you, but I won't say that. I'll say I'm praying for you. And so you can get attention by this. And I'd say that some people get conditioned into the way they get attention is to just only vomit pit voice. Like their only mode of communication is to draw attention to their own pain and sorrow. Not to say that it's never appropriate.
Right.
That sometimes it is appropriate to admit,
this is where
I'm not just in the middle. I'm in the middle and don't know a way out right now. It is where I'm at. And but again, I hear what you're saying. Like I would struggle with this because like I've nurtured a confidence in the Lord that like no matter how deep the pit is or how bad I feel now or how dark it seems now, I'm not going to let this have the final say.
But it's sad to say that there's probably people out there that they don't have anything that's anchoring them out of the pit, you know? And so I do have compassion for those people that this is their narrative,
right?
You know?
And
so,
how did they describe like using this voice, like even with writing? Was there
writing? Yeah. Man, I'm having a hard time remembering.
You just didn't relate to it at all. So.
No, well, and even mentioned when this one was mentioned, they even said because of knowing that primarily the people listening to this are people of faith, this one's harder for us to see because there's always something to look to. But this one was more put in the category of maybe books that aren't real life, but mostly stories that, and I don't read those kinds of stories. So, I mean, I guess it could be your, I don't know, help me out. What are the
Shakespearean
genres?
tragedies?
What'd you say?
Shakespearean tragedies or Greek tragedies.
And even poetry. Like there was mentions of poetry being
Psalm 88.
Very,
My
just very
companions have
dark.
become darkness.
Right.
That's how it ends.
Yeah. So it just has such a dark tone to it. And
so was there a value like for the honesty of that in the sense of like, hey, if you're really going through it, being able to like write in a way that is honest about those feelings is there's some value
this
to
one
that.
may bring like healing actually, as it's like you're writing what is actually going on, where you're really at. Maybe it brings awareness to the despair that you're walking through, you know? So I don't know if this is like in your own journals, you're seeing these things. I don't know what published work of this totally looks like, but I think we all have probably a couple journal entries where despair is our friend.
Yeah. I've I've specific seasons of my life where I'm just really struggling. And it can be helpful and healing to just be honest in what I'm writing. Just write it out in a journal. Like, God, this is where I feel. This is where I'm frustrated. I'm upset at myself. I feel like I've failed. And just being honest and getting those words out. That's not even something that I would want anybody else to read necessarily. No. It's just like there is like something liberating about being that honest in prayer. Sometimes it's
it's a good way to say it.
Just being able to get those emotions verbalized and out on the paper sometimes is part of the process of starting to see it and then have my mind renewed to the hope to the things on the other side of it. But I do think, as people of faith, a lot of times we're actually averse to negative emotions and we don't even know really sometimes
what
how to
do
deal
with them.
Yeah. What to do with them. And so I can see the value in recognizing that there is a unique tone for these kinds of emotions and these kinds of feelings, and then growing more skillful at being able to communicate in that way.
Yeah.
I think part of the insight for me is whenever, I take it back to the spouse relationship. So like if a spouse is in this pit tone and the other spouse is coming from a teacher place, it's not going to connect. It's not going to connect. It's like the classic, like, I don't want you to solve the problem. I just want you to be here
feel it with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the worst thing we can say as husbands, well,
that's so
I'll
good.
put this in a position of
you
not a feeler,
right?
Being the husband of a feeler.
Yeah.
Like the worst thing I can say is, well, you shouldn't feel that way.
There you go.
You shouldn't feel that way.
There was one day in particular, I just through our journey with Urias that I just felt completely overwhelmed. And as you're speaking, I'm remembering this day. And it's like the only thing within me to feel strength was just to write it all out. And I would say that was a day of my journal of like, God, there's no answers. There's no hope. All of those things were coming out in my writing. And something about just visually seeing it on the paper gave me perspective of my own self in that moment, Yeah. And thank God that there is so much more to life to anchor to. But I can see some value in it for sure.
Yeah.
So
let me
go ahead.
Let me pastor people for just a second
Please.
on that. Yeah. Because I agree there's it's not just therapeutic. There is some kind of healing that comes by even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Through it, there is something that is the process in the through that sometimes faith people, will jump on you like that's word curses, or you're not letting faith manifest, or you're not using words of faith. And my challenge to that is, half of the Psalms are laments.
There you go.
And there's a couple laments like Psalm 88 that it just ends. It doesn't end on a positive note. But the thing is, like specifically, we'll just take the book of Psalms. There's 150 of them. Even though laments are approximately half, they're still only half.
That's good.
So it's not a lack of faith to admit you're in a pit, but faith goes through it. And what we're intended to have as people of faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I still quote King James and New King James with that. I still haven't got the ESV stuck in my head on that. That like we still have to nurture a hope that is beyond the present, but it doesn't do us any good to deny the present, pretend like that's not real. What we just have to do is make hope and the future that energizes faith more real than the current present reality and feelings. And so that's where you take like Psalm 130, out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. There's an honesty about where you're at in the depths, in the pit. And there's this cry for the Lord answering. But then part of the process of that Psalms is it does start to elevate your perspective through the whole process, where it says, I wait for you more than watchmen for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning. And then there's the instruction to the people of God, O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is steadfast love. So in the journey to get to faith being the primary posture we're holding, it's not sin to admit the process to get there. It's not giving doubt a place by admitting where you're at as you're moving. We just have to be vigilant to not be stuck there.
Right.
And there is a cultural value for wallowing in the pit. We accommodate this culturally. Right. We accommodate the pit. And so that I get that people don't want to be stuck there. So they're going to kind of pretend their way through and almost condemn people for being in the pit. But we can't jump ditches on this. We can't wallow in the pit, nor can we pretend like it doesn't exist.
Right.
In the very least, just being people of faith, we can still admit when we're in the valley. We're going through it. We will go through it, but we're not circumventing it or trying to pretend like we're not going through it. We're going through the valley of the shadow of death.
That's it.
We got a shadow. I'm in the shadow. I'm in the pit. I believe that there's light over there, and I'm going to keep moving in that direction. But I will be honest, I'm in the shadow. I'm in the valley.
So back to the thought that we kind of stopped short a little bit earlier, the idea of like the cultural tone, right? On social media, on like the kinds of things that generate the most responses tend to be this 3 and 4 tone, the field and the pit. And so I think it's important for us to maybe just do an examination of some of the pitfalls of over an over reliance on those methods of communication. Yeah. Because even in some of the things I'm picking up from what you're sharing and what you're learning is like being able to go in and out of these tones for the right purposes and for the right, applying them correctly is what is going to help you be a more effective communicator or a more effective writer. And so just because our generation or the current culture that we're in seems to respond most to the field or the pit tones, doesn't mean that that's the only tones that we should be using. Yeah. And it also doesn't mean that they're the most effective way of actually communicating the truth maybe that we're trying to get across.
I think that's good. I think that, just from what you're saying, it's like there's a place to hold value for each one of these. That even if one is, maybe getting that immediate response more, there's a place to value all of these. And I was just even thinking culturally, we mentioned this in an earlier podcast, like just that culturally speaking, like letting the voice of the elders or letting the voice of those that have gone before us isn't always something that people are searching out or going for. And that's for all kinds of reasons. But I think that when we can see these kind of frames of things, it helps us see that there's a value for each one, and that the field is gonna, there's a togetherness in it. So that's just awesome because you don't feel alone.
Right.
You don't feel like you have to speak on this mountain of, I know everything I'm saying and it's going to be perfectly, if you do it, it's going to happen that way for you. So there's less risk in the field because you're experiencing it all together at the same time. Right. So,
and at the same time, though, it's more risky because you're being vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
So like you're
kind of letting everybody in on the ups and downs of everything going on.
But I think we relate to that a whole lot
do.
more than the previous generation. Like any show of not having it together is perceived as weakness. And, from a prior generation, those are, cultural
and
things.
We almost on a daily basis can journal our life out for everybody to see.
Yeah.
Like how much that has changed because what we experience, in a picture or in a moment, we can quickly put out there. That's kind of like a field report of the day, or whatever.
I think the danger from the other side, though, is to almost idolize vulnerability, or like to commoditize or like turn it into
the idol.
It's like the more vulnerable I can be, or the more despairing I can be in my writing, like I'm going to get more attention. And so we're actually incentivized some ways to communicate from these places of like a victim mentality or a place of being in despair, because that's going to be the kind of, writing that gets more of the emotional response.
Or
things
one
like
of the things they talk about is a felt need. Like that is what you have to zero in on to write a book that people want to read. Right. Well, the field and the pit hit that one a little bit faster,
Right.
So,
right.
What are you thinking?
I just have in my mind, I'm in favor and for, writing. I'm obviously totally in favor of you writing. But also, as someone who reads a lot of books, I keep thinking, like, what are the kinds of books that outlive the author? And I would say that there's probably tons of bestsellers that are totally hitting the felt need and totally connecting with people now, but 10 years from now could be completely irrelevant.
And that's the real reality is it may be more immediate, but it's not always longevity with that. So I think you're right.
Well, and it's not that I would be advocating for another mode, like, well, then you need to get it because only the tower tone makes it, cross generational. I don't think that.
Yeah.
I think a skilled communicator can flow in and out of each of them in such a way to connect not just to a wider audience, because you don't want to write a book to reach everybody. They're just the Bible's it. Like that's it.
Yeah,
and
it's
as
the
far
ultimate
as
field guide, tower voice, teacher, and in the pit.
As far as I know, none of us are inspired of the Spirit to write canon. But if we want longevity, I think it is able to. I think we are at a place where you cannot just hit the tower in teacher mode. You just can't exclusively speak through that modality. You have to flow. People need connectivity. Even we'll just say a previous generation that might primarily relate and connect with tower and teacher tone still want and need some connection on these other tones.
Right.
I just think that we're wise to skillfully go through each of them by the Spirit to know how we are connecting with people. And then in that connectivity, where are we pointing people? I think Jesus went through all these. I think he had different positions and different times where he used different tones and voices. And then I think the same with the apostles. You just look at Paul's different writing, the difference between Corinthians and Thessalonians and Colossians and Philippians and Galatians all have different tones to it. So the Galatians, he was in tower and teaching mode. to the point where he's insulting them. Oh, you stupid Galatians. Like, how foolish can you be? Like, that's pretty intense. And to the Corinthians, he's like, come on, man. Like, you're trying to compare me to these super apostles? That's a little more field, slightly pit. He even admitted some pit things about like, hey, my weakness, I get it. I'm weak, but here's what the Lord showed me about my weakness, that his grace is sufficient. And so I think that it's wise for us to not get stuck in a rut and become aware of this. And I'd say, just on a side note to that, the vast majority of people are not going to be writing books.
No.
But the majority of people in today's age are writing their journal on a global platform. So if you're trying to get attention, you can get attention all sorts of ways, but are you having an impact? I don't know, maybe, but is it a good impact? Is it a kingdom impact? And I'd say that most people, there's a whole set of paragraphs, a few pages of Dallas Willard's book, The Divine Conspiracy, that talk about the power of words, and that, that a lot of people's communication is about as important as, what does he say? He uses that is equivalent to the selling of Geritol. That like that's how pointless much communication can be. And if we want to be effective as disciples, making disciples, then we have to learn how to be effective in all of these tones.
Yeah. Well, just some awareness, just even in this podcast, right? Like, I'd say that this podcast is mostly from that field tone.
Yeah.
But we've got some teacher-oriented communicators on here, and we tend to try to like draw out the point where you can learn, or we like, I think, it's a challenge that we're kind of always wrestling with, even in making these shows, is like, how do we hit the right tone? Because we want this to be relatable. We want this to not just be another sermon, so to speak. Like we want, because we know that there's a generation out there that wants to learn and relate and understand and to feel connected. And sometimes like our default mode, even in church, is always that tower and teacher kind of approach. And so even a platform like this, like, hey, sorry, we're, showing behind the curtain a little bit. Our strategy in putting this out there is to try to tackle some of these things that we face in life from a different tone, from a different way of looking at things, and to really have conversation around them, not just instruction and teaching. Instruction and teaching is really helpful, but there's something about feeling like you're locking arms with somebody and going together in it that I think is just really valuable. So I can see, even with this podcast itself, being an experiment in trying to communicate truth, but with a different tone.
Yeah. Good.
So whether we're writing or whether we're speaking or whether we're, journaling or having conversations with our family members or friends, it's like having an awareness of what tone you're taking. I think, man, that's a really insightful thing to understand.
That's really where I came to, is like, as learning this, I'm like, it's just super insightful. Not one is better than the other, but it's just like, being able to be in the moment and, take that moment and know that the emotional intelligence of that moment. I think this is very similar, so.
I think it's helpful to recognize whenever your communication fails too.
That's good.
And so it's like, I can go back. I mean, it's literally last night. I went on a walk with my wife and we were talking, and then all of a sudden it felt like, whoa, we are not communicating. It's like, I think my tone was in teacher mode and her tone was in field mode. And like every contribution I was making to the conversation made her feel like I was belittling her instead of like trying to listen and understand.
Yeah.
And I felt completely inept in the moment to just be able to switch tones. Like it felt, because I didn't even have the language at that point. You just shared this with me today, but like, it felt like in the moment, if I was to try to switch, I would be being pretentious.
Yeah.
Or I would just be like faking like empathy or something. And that's like, I just can't even do that. Like, it's not that I can do it badly, is that I just can't. Like, I can't, like those feelings have to come from a genuine place. Otherwise they're so artificial that it's like, it's embarrassing.
That's good.
And so just, in a practical way, like navigating marriage conversations. And eventually we got to the place where it's like, we both had to just say, look, I'm sorry. Let's start over. And let's try that again. And then, we brought it to a place of resolution. But so much of the frustration that was caused was a tone issue more than anything else.
Than
it was
what words
just like,
were being shared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like neither of us were saying anything wrong necessarily. It was just
ineffective.
It was ineffective because it was coming across with a certain tone that had all of this extra baggage that I was like, I didn't send any of that, but that's what you received.
Yeah.
So
it's really good.
We'll have to do a follow-up episode on the listening side.
Yes.
This is the communication side. We got to get to listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah. So looking into the future, like what do you think is the next step as far as like unpacking and learning how to communicate in these tones for you? Like even as you're
man. Well, it really has been insightful to know, okay, where's my comfort zone? Like where do we go to? I could start recognizing it, not perfectly, but like I recognize kind of where his posture is. I recognize even traits in my kids, at times what tone they carry. I can think about just relationships in my life. And some of that is the tone I've allowed them access to carry in my life. And so I think it's just been kind of cool to see it in the lives of the people that I'm around. But then it's also, like my kids don't need me to just be the filled tone to them. That would be like the parent that's just trying to be the friend all the time.
Right.
Now there's moments to go down and walk it out together. So, I mean, I just kind of started seeing it unlocking in a lot of things. But it's also when they're pouring their heart out to me, it's not the moment to come from the tower and just totally annihilate their real pit feelings or whatever. So, I started being able to see, I was learning this about writing, but I was starting to be able to see tones in so many interpersonal relationships. So I don't know that I answered what you asked me.
No,
but I think it's just been cool learning, know?
Well, so. I think that does answer what I asked, and that you have to, the more you recognize how these tones work and what they're useful for, like that's going to help you when you're writing. Yeah. Like know when to use what voice.
And one thing I realized too is what if someone has the expectation of my tone to be one of these things that isn't primarily a comfort zone. That was something as I shared in vulnerability, just my journey of communication. Like if people are constantly asking me to be a certain tone that is not an exercised one,
right?
Man, you start feeling that, Yeah. So I always joke, even in our home, that there's certain roles and responsibilities I carry. It just comes natural. But like if you want to learn how to do something, go talk to your dad. Like he'll lay it out line upon line, step upon step, like tying kids' shoes. Like I can show you, but he just has an effective way of making it into a lesson of teaching that they just grab a hold of it, Yeah. So, I mean, we've even joked about that, in some ways. And that doesn't, but it can't be an excuse that I can't teach because that's not what I'm trying to say.
Right.
But this has been a framework to help me. Oh, okay. Teaching is not my primary, and for whatever reason, it's just not. But in certain things, like if I'm talking to a mom that's, got young toddlers, I totally feel comfortable in a teaching mode because I've walked through it. There's experience I have that if you want me to teach how to get your kid to sleep, like I've been down that road. Yep. So I had to start seeing that there are things that I can step into that teacher, and there are things I can step into that tower, and things going after in prayer, and battling certain battles. I can get that tower voice or, so I have the other ones, but it's just been a really good frame for me, to see that, where I'm comfortable and the ones in which I can exercise. So
I think this is really insightful because just from personal experience, like the amount of times miscommunication causes conflict, and it's not even from a place of from malicious intent, but it's just accidental misuse of tone.
Yeah.
It's like, this is really clarifying and helpful. Like, I'm just thinking, like, how many conversations with my teenager where I've taken tower approach when she's just longing for pit or field, you know, it's like, just feel what I'm and experience what I'm like, I've been through high school. I don't want to do that again.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But I've recently had really awesome conversations with my teenager. And so much of it is just listening and trying to relate to her where she's at and what she's going through and understand. And then she literally the other night, it blessed my heart so much. She's like, we were talking about, just stuff and how to navigate relationships and different things. And then she's like, so you have any more wisdom to share?
Aww.
I'm like, oh, that's really sweet of you to ask.
That's what I'm
And
waiting for.
I'm like, do you have a particular topic? She's like, no, I don't know. Just, you got
that's
any?
Cool.
And
it's
anyway,
a good connectiveness in that moment. Yeah.
And so whenever communication allows for like a transfer of value,
there you go.
She started to value the teacher and maybe even to some extent the tower, because I remember like one specific,
you got in the field in the pit with her probably. Yeah.
Well, like one specific thing I said to her was like the key to unlocking something. And it was very much tower voice. Like my instruction was like, why are you allowing that person to affect your emotions? Like and I basically said it in a very clarifying way. And in the moment she didn't respond super well because she was kind of emotional and stuff. But then she, like later on the next couple of days, she's like, when you said that, it just clicked with me all of a sudden. Like, I've been allowing this situation to completely, defeat me. And that's stupid. Like, why was I doing that? And then she kind of
started feeling powerful instead of powerless.
Yeah.
That's
and so
cool.
anyway, I think there's a lot more here underneath the surface than just these kind of four tones. Like there's something really insightful about how we as humans communicate and how we kind of default into these different voices. And just like with anything, like awareness brings a heightened sense of skill and just the ability to navigate relationships when you're aware of it.
I think as we overcome things, in some personalities, overcoming it, you never want to revisit it. But in some personalities, you don't mind sharing in how you overcame it. And I think that that's even something that as we're parenting or whatever that looks like, whatever scope of influence that we have, there's things that my kids will walk through that maybe I won't have exactly experienced the same way, but I have experienced something. And from that, I can bring that into those conversations, with them, but kind of lost my train of thought. I was going somewhere, but, in that, I know what I was going to say. So some people, when they've overcome, they don't want to revisit those things. It's like, it's a distant memory. And some people don't even remember it.
Right.
And I'm not one of those people. I can like bring memories back into the reality. And so we're even different in that way, So I think that that's what makes me kind of be able to jump in with people in moments where I appreciate the people that don't always go all the way back to the memory and bring it in, It's kind of messy sometimes.
I got the lesson. I don't want to go back there.
Yeah,
I don't even remember
but in
it,
effective writing, like there's moments you got to go back to those moments of all those feelings and all of the nasty, the yuck, to be able to actually effectively make it relatable to others. So just talking about your stories of high school, like in parenting, I'm finding too, it's like I got to go back to some of those things I don't really care to go back to, but it creates this moment of connection that's vital.
There's like, an annoyance at the previously immature version of yourself.
Yeah.
And you don't want to, like, you're like, hey, I'm past that. I don't want to go there again. But in the effort to bring somebody else along, you have to be able to relate and speak, from that perspective. So.
And knowing in communication, the person that's listening, what tone are they in or all those things. So it's good stuff. Yeah. I'm enjoying it. So.
Well, any other wisdom to share?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. It's just been fun. It's been fun.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm thrilled to see what comes of that as you learn more and more about writing and, future projects down the road that we are silently, teasing a little bit right now. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of this this conversation. This was a lot about communication and talking and stuff, and I think it's a good point. Like listening is probably a good follow up to this. So maybe in a future episode, and maybe after I get better at it, we can talk about listening. Hey, if you have enjoyed this, if you've enjoyed listening to this episode on communication, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We would love to hear from you. Post in the comments about a time where you've used one of these tones and maybe it went really well. Maybe it didn't go so well. We just want to hear from you. We'd appreciate it. We'll see you guys we'll see you on the next one. I guess that's the most awkward ending I've had in a while, but we'll see you later.